car to have, the whole 9 yards. And then I'm meeting. Good evening, everyone. It looks like it's 5:15, even though, just for general knowledge, this clock right here says it's 5:20, so it's just 5 minutes fast. The Vice Mayor and I have looked up a couple times and gone like, oh, wait, wrong time. So welcome to our May 17th Gilbert Town Council study session. We just have one item on our agenda for this evening, and that will be the discussion on the Transportation Master Plan. And I believe that Kyle Maris will be headed down to the podium to start the presentation.
Mayor and Council, good evening. Thank you very much for letting us dominate the study session agenda tonight. This is a very important plan. We've been working on this for quite some time. This is one of those plans that has a lot of input in it. So every single department, I believe, within the town has touched this at some point, either providing data or input or reviewing the document. There's also been a lot of outside input received for this plan too. So it's an excellent plan, and I've got some very smart consultants here with us tonight. Vamshi Elsidi, Phyllis Hugel are both from Kittleson. They were kind of the spearhead on this that drove us forward, working with all the different departments. And then Aaron Xavier from Valley Metro. You might remember when we started this, one of our big questions was transit and how we wanted to integrate more transit or integrate transit into our transportation master plan. So we partnered very closely with Valley Metro, and Aaron spearheaded a study taking into a lot of information from other cities in the region and working closely with folks to bring us a transportation or a transit plan that goes hand in glove with our transportation master plan. So I know you've seen the transportation master plan and all of the items in the Dropbox. Aaron's report is in there as well, and these all go together as part of the transportation master plan. This is a 20-year plan. It does contain 7 chapters and 6 appendices, so it's a very well-rounded plan. There's a lot of implementation strategies in there. There's toolboxes for mixed-use paths. There's a lot of good things in there that we can use as we go forward. One of the things I really appreciate about this group and the plan itself is that each chapter builds on the previous chapter, whether it's public input or it's the data that goes along with it. All that information continues to build through the document as the plan is built. And then at the very end, there's an implementation strategy, one that we can follow every year. We can take a look at the plan every year and make sure that this stays a very dynamic document as we move forward. Tonight is our study session, May 17th. This is simply to introduce you to the plan, give you some information on it. As I mentioned, there's 7 chapters and 6 appendices. It's quite a long document. We intend on coming back to the council June 28th for adoption. But between then and now, we know that there's going to be comments that come in as you review it, questions, probably some changes to the plan, but at least I wanted to get this group in front of you as soon as possible so that we could kick this off and have everybody take a look at it. So with that, I will turn it over to Vamshi and Phyllis to begin the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. Mayor, members of the council, thank you so much for having me here today. This has been 2 years in the making. To be honest with you, it does not feel like 2 years. It went much faster than that. Let's jump right in. Again, like Kyle said, what I plan to do today is to present some of the highlights of the draft transportation master plan today and answer any questions that you guys might have. Again, we'll start with the purpose of the plan. So the purpose primarily was to really understand how things have changed since the last transportation master plan was done about 8 to 10 years ago. So we focused a lot on, how has the population changed? How has the demographics changed in terms of the roadway network, multimodal roadway network? What are the gaps? Which roadways are congested? What are some additional needs looking at the system today, and also looking at, 20 years out, what the system might look like if we don't make any improvements, and if we do make some improvements, how would that address some of the issues that we've identified? And then we also wanted to focus on creating sort of a more viable, a more implementable, and an equitable, and above all, a connected multimodal transportation network. So that was kind of one of our primary focus as we were developing this plan. And last but not least, we did want to create something that the town would eventually end up truly using, and then use it as like a blueprint or a guidebook that they could take it going forward and then implement it. So this goes in line with the City of Future principles that the town has established in the previous efforts. And again, why are we doing this? As you all know, this is not news to you all. Gilbert continues to grow. The population by 2050 is expected to increase by another 21%. And then employment, on the other hand, is expected to go up by about 48%, which is good. But at the same time, adding all of these additional population and employment numbers kind of adds more stress to the transportation system. So that's one of the reasons why we did this transportation master plan. And then, till date, most of the focus has been moving cars. So we took a slightly different approach where we said, let's focus on trying to move people irrespective of what mode they would like to choose. So if they want to choose a vehicle, let's make sure that they have a connected network that they could use. If they want to choose a bike or ped network, then they have a corresponding bike and ped network that makes sense. So the goal here was not to sacrifice one mode against the other. It was trying to make sure that we have a connected system that, irrespective of what mode people would like to use, they have that system in place. And then, last but not least, we also wanted to provide the town with a prioritized list of investments. That way, going forward, you have a pretty good idea in terms of what are your primary priorities, secondary, and then so on. Okay. We basically followed a 5-step approach. So step 1, Gilbert today, basically we tried to evaluate what the current conditions are in terms of what modes people are using today, where the growth areas are, where the vulnerable populations are located. So all of this kind of went into helping us identify where there is needs in the existing system, and then where there are gaps in the existing system by mode. And then step 2 was to look at Gilbert tomorrow, basically, in terms of 50 years out, what happens if we don't make any improvements, the population and employment continue to grow the way they have been, then how much additional stress is that going to add onto the existing system? And based on that, we were able to identify some hotspots and gaps and additional needs, based on what the future might look like. And then the next step was essentially to reach out to the public in terms of trying to get their input on, are there any additional issues that maybe we have not looked at? So we'll get into that a little bit more detailed in the further part of the presentation. This next step was, we put together a universe of potential solutions together. and then figured out in terms of which solutions make sense for each of the issues that we've identified in the previous 2 steps. And then we utilized a prioritized methodology to basically develop which are going to be the primary tier 1 priority, tier 2, and tier 3 priorities, and then essentially develop a phased improvement plan. So what we circulated to you prior to the meeting is, the draft master plan plus all the appendices that go with it. Okay. Then how public engagement was a critical part of the project. We emphasized this so much, and this actually influenced on how we actually developed the plan quite a bit. So because of COVID, we were not able to do in-person meetings. So what we did instead was we did a more virtual open house type of a setup where we created an online website where public could go and just have the same look and feel of like if they were to walk into a public meeting, you'd have stations, you could see the boards and follow through. And you could also make interactively comments on the map or fill out surveys. So we went to extreme lengths to make sure that even though we're not able to meet public in person, we did make sure that they had the experience using our virtual approach that they were able to provide the input that was important. Just to compare, just to give you some numbers on how successful this actually was, we got close to about 5,000 visitors, unique visitors to the website, and that's usually more than what you typically get at a public forum, in-person public forum. We got close to like 2,000 surveys completed, and then we had about 565 map comments that public. And I have to say, public did take quite a bit of time making comments. They provided us some lengthy responses and feedback, and we did take that pretty seriously. And just for comparison purposes, the general plan that was done about a year or 2 ago, they had about 516 surveys, so we had about 2,000. And then map comments, they had about 170, we had about 565. And then in terms of surveys, they had site visits, they had 2,600, we've had about double that, 5,000. So just saying these, I'm putting these numbers out there just so that you get a sense we did not leave any stone unturned in terms of public outreach. Because of COVID, we did not use that as an excuse for not getting public input. And as you'll see throughout the slides, how that truly influenced on how we came up with the plan. At the end of the day, we are providing you quite a number of deliverables that will set you up for the future going forward. The number one is an integrated transportation master plan document. So this would be your blueprint, transportation blueprint for what Gilbert would look like now and going into the future. And then the second one is going to be a 3 typologies and a multimodal networks document. So basically what this is it kind of, again, is a transportation blueprint by mode. And then it also provides some additional guidance on, how best can you reconfigure your engineering street cross sections to basically make them more context sensitive. That way you're making the best use of your space based on need, demand, and the surrounding context. And then we're really excited that as part of this TMP, we got the opportunity to truly integrate the multi-use path of the trails as part of the overall transportation system. So that's one of the easiest way to expand your alternative modes. So this was a great opportunity and a great idea from the town staff to basically integrate that. So on that realm, we also developed 2 products. One is a multi-use path implementation plan, and then a design toolbox, basically what the town can use going forward in terms of making sure that there's consistency on how the trails are developed going forward. And then again, going along the lines of City of the Future, we did look at all the possible emerging technologies that might be coming our way. So we evaluated a lot of those with respect to how Gilbert how they might impact Gilbert. and we evaluated and ranked a few technologies that would have some direct impact, and then we provided some guidance, and that guidance is documented in the Emerging Mobility Playbook. That way you're ready for the city of future ambitions. Okay. With that, actually, I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis, who will run through some of the findings.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, I'm Phyllis Hugel. Sorry, it's a new last name for me. I'm trying to get used to it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure, too. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, thank you for having me. I'm Phyllis Hugel. Like Vamshi said, I'm going to run through a bit of our findings that we found throughout the course of this plan that really helped drive the recommendations and projects and strategies identified in the TMP. So Vamshi stole a bit of my thunder, but Gilbert is growing, as you all know. We're hot, and I'm not just meaning our heat, even though summer is most definitely here. By 2050, we're expecting over 20% increase in population. More than that, we're projected to have 48% increase in employment. So you can imagine what our road system looks like today and the congestion and our developments. So just project out to 2050 and what those needs of our residents and our community might be. So this was really a driving factor that helped us kind of plan for the long-term vision. And so we asked our residents, today driving around town, how do you see driving? And 92% said, today I see it as really easy. But in the future, 67% said they actually saw it getting worse. And so based on those projections of our employment and our population growth, the data shows that as well. You can see on these maps, these pink and these red lines today, those are areas that are experiencing congestion today, corridors. And then on your right is if no roadway improvements are made, these red and pink lines are additional areas that will experience congestion. You can also look at intersections and see those delays going forward, and that's if we just stay status quo as we are today. So we don't want that. We don't want 67% of our residents to say it's hard to travel around our town. We also really wanted to take a key look at safety. Safety is at the heart of everything, and the town does. So we did an in-depth safety assessment of vehicle, pedestrian, and bicycle crashes to identify hotspot intersections and corridors that are experiencing safety issues so we can develop plans and countermeasures to address those issues. This, again, was something that we heard a lot in our public outreach. We asked, what do you think is the greatest transportation need in the town today? And you can see the blue and the orange lines highlight the improving safety for all users, as well as reducing travel and congestion on roads. So these two slides tie into exactly what our residents are saying as what we should address and improve. We also, as Vamshi said, we wanted to really look at this from an all modes perspective. So we did bring on Valley Metro to be partners through this planning process to help us develop a transit master plan for the town. And so part of that process was looking at what we had today. And this map shows a clear representation of where our transit routes are today. And you can clearly see there's a couple east-west, a couple north-south routes, but largely a part of our town has no service to public transportation. And what's interesting, when I go back to that community outreach, and we ask how easy is it for you to get around town, where 92% say, oh, it's really easy to get around by car. Less and less people are saying by walking and biking it's easy, and only 32% said that by bus or other transit it's easy. That's probably largely due to just not having access in their areas. So we asked the public, if you were to improve transit in Gilbert, what would you most be interested in? And 52%, they would really want to expand public transportation into new areas. And 30%, they would want to focus on these corridors that we have now, but just increase the frequency on them or improve amenities on these. So this existing conditions analysis, as well as what we found from our community profile, our socioeconomic analysis, really helped drive Valley Metro's assessments of potential solutions or ideas for transit going forward. We also wanted to look at all modes, so that includes our freight movement. And if we haven't seen anything in the past 2 years, it is that we see Amazon cars and UPS on the roads all the time. I know Amazon is in my house multiple times a week. So we need to accommodate this increase of goods movement. And so we identified, working with MAG, what corridors in the town, what corridors are serving our goods movement today, so we can address those improvements as we go forward. And we also have to look at all of our users. Another item we've learned for the past 2 years are that people want options. Businesses are increasingly looking for places that are connected to transit or have pedestrian and bicycle access, just creating that more livable community space. So we wanted to do an evaluation of what our walking and biking network is like today and how it compares to our neighbors, as well as what our issues and needs are internally. And so while we have a really great active transportation network, when we compare it to some of our neighbors of their walking and biking scores, you can see that we start to lean on the lower end scale of not having that complete network or that connectivity some of our neighbors might have. And so all of that analysis, along with public outreach, was really great. But we wanted to know, okay, what items would people really want us to invest in? So we asked the public trade-off questions. So if they had to make the hard decision tomorrow of where we invest our money, what would they pick? So we asked a couple questions, and these are just examples of them. The first was if people want to expand, modernize, or preserve our transportation system. And it's almost an even split between residents wanting to upgrade or improve our existing infrastructure or really expanding our network. So that's new roads, new facilities. And when we asked about bike lanes or bike paths, largely people wanted those more expensive buffered or protected bike facilities where you're offset from vehicles, so it gives you that greater sense of safety and comfort, which goes back to all of the other public outreach items that and our data analysis that we were finding. And we also asked about trails. It was a part of this plan, and this is really interesting. We thought at the beginning of this project that a large focus of the Trails Master Plan would be looking at improving our existing facilities to have increased amenities. But when we asked the public, largely they said, no, I want to be connected. I don't feel like I can get to a trail really easily. We heard this so much in stakeholder meetings and during our written comments on the website of that. I want safe crossings. I want to access the trail. I want to be able to go out and ride the trail at night with my kid. So that really shifted the Trails Master Plan to focus more on how can we increase connectivity from our neighbors to our trail system. So all of this shaped up to really be a baseline to set up the strategies and programs and projects identified in the TMP. So there were a couple key items that really were the drivers that helped us create the plan. And so one was that we really wanted to provide mobility options. And why do we have this kind of lack of mobility options? There are lots of reasons why. We could say maybe there's a lack of reliable alternative modes. Maybe our infrastructure, there's gaps in it that we can't connect to those trail systems, or maybe we don't have access to transit. So part of this process, we created complete networks by mode. So what complete networks are, and they're supposed to fly in, there we go. So what complete networks are, they're not complete streets. So we know we have limited right-of-way, we know we have limited space, we know some of our corridors just honestly really don't have the demand to accommodate all modes. So what Complete Networks does is it assigns each corridor with the modal needs of it. So what happens is at the end, you have a complete connected system by mode. So for instance, if I pick freight network, I now have a look at what streets are going to be accommodating our large vehicle freight and goods movement through the town. So now as a town, I can identify where my investments need to be, what those road designs need to be to accommodate this freight infrastructure. In the opposite direction, I know now where I want to hyper-focus or make my investments for my transit network as well. So maybe these transit networks, these transit corridors, we would want to make sure the corridors are designed in a way that the transit can efficiently move and safely move through that corridor. Maybe there's enhanced pedestrian crossings to those bus stops. So we don't have to do this on every road. We want to do it on our priority transit network. So let me give an example of kind of how the Complete Networks works, because it's a big concept to kind of wrap your head around. So this is an example of our bike network. So this is our bike network today. And as you can see, it's great. It expands the whole length of the community. But when you really zoom in, you can start to see there's gaps in the system. And then when you look more at the quality of their network, you can start to see that a lot of our bikes lanes are on arterial streets. So it's those high volume roads, high speeds, something that, it's not necessarily safe that you would want to ride with your kid on. So we've developed this complete network on your screen, working with the town. So what this is, it's taking our current system, it's filling in those gaps, it's connecting us to our trail network, and then it's also identifying low stress connections. And when I say low stress, what that means is we're looking at streets that are low vehicle speeds, low volume, something that I always think of if it's something that I would ride a bike with a kid on, right? This is something that's comfortable for all users. So it's something that when I leave and I get out of my house, I know I can take these routes and I can get to the grocery store, or I can just go on my leisurely bike ride safely and comfortably. So what's interesting is you can start to quantify what this complete networks does for the town. And so we just wanted to look, this is one of the metrics that we looked at is if we develop this complete network, how far can someone travel via a 20-minute bike ride on these low stress network? So that is those low volumes, low speed roads. So if you look at it today as our system is, people riding, if you left your house, you could only get to 3% of Gilbert. If we can create this complete network, you can now reach 13% of Gilbert. But what's interesting is when you quantify this in terms of jobs or access to schools or access to grocery stores, which is in the TMP, it gives you a really interesting story. So these colorful maps on your right illustrates job accessibility. So the map on your left is job accessibility today. So what this is saying is all the areas that are in that dark red, you have poor access being that 20-minute bike ride to a job. Where those that are green, you have high access or good access to jobs. So today you can only reach about 3,000 jobs via that 20-minute bike ride. But the image on your right, you can start to see the whole town turns into this bright green, good access to jobs. So we almost double the amount of jobs someone can reach within a 20-minute bike ride. So this goes back a lot to that, economic development side too, where businesses are really looking to locate to places that have these active transportation facilities and create these kind of walkable, bikeable communities. And another item that we heard from the town and we, gathered through our research was that, the lack of flexibility in our street design has kind of led to some of this lack of alternative modes. And that's because largely, as every city, honestly, in the nation, has traditionally designed our roads to be based on just their functional class alone. It doesn't really account to what the land use context is, or really what the vehicle or modal needs of the network are. So as part of this process, we worked with the town to develop street typologies. Again, it's another really big terminology, so I'm going to show you in pictures because I'm a visual learner. So on your screen is two collectors in town. And so our current street design says that these two roads need to be designed exactly the same way. But if you look at the image on your left, this is in a residential area. It is next to a school. And your image on your right, this is in an industrial park, kind of business area. So if I'm using the same street design, it's not really taking into effect what the real needs are of this corridor. So when I think of the corridor on your left in the neighborhood, I think this probably needs better pedestrian crossings, wider sidewalks, bigger, safer, wider bike facilities, slower speeds. But then I look at the collector on your right, I think, oh, this is probably on the freight network. This is probably, I want to make sure that goods movement can get through here. I want to have, wider lanes to accommodate wide vehicles. I want to have, different pedestrian crossings to get them away from these large vehicles. So it's not really a one-size-fits-all approach if you take into what the actual context and needs are of a street. So we developed these street typologies that are based on their functional classification, like our street designs are today, but also takes into the land use context. And so these land use contexts was pulled straight in from the general plan. We worked with the consultant that developed the general plan and also with the planning department to develop place types or land use types. So for each corridor, you'll know what the functional classification is and what the surrounding land use type is. And based on that, we have 16 different street typologies. And what this does is it outlines the flexible design of what the real true needs and design functions of a corridor are. It outlines, what is our target speeds, what kind of shade do we need on this facility, what are our allowable range for different facilities, and what are our preferred ranges. And so this, in tandem with the current street designs, kind of helps the town really create a flexible approach to designing corridors to really meet the needs going forward. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Vamshi to talk through the projects.
Thank you, Phyllis. So I'll kind of go over, some key highlights of the projects that we've developed as part of this final master plan. So the way we organize the projects is we group them into 6 different categories. Keep in mind that some projects overlap, so we kind of group them based on predominantly what issue it's addressing. So type 1 is capacity projects. So basically, it's roadway widening, extending existing roadways, or even building new roadways, basically. So that's a big chunk of projects or capacity projects in the master plan. And then the second type is maintenance projects. So we did not include day-to-day maintenance type of projects. We focused more on, roadway reconstruction, some big dollar maintenance projects that roads are really due for big maintenance. So we included those in the maintenance projects category. And then we placed some special attention to intersection and safety projects, because this was one of the items that we heard loud and clear from the public, that traffic signals need to be looked at or adjusted, because a lot of the congestion happens at signals. So we made sure that those projects were grouped separately. Similar, in addition to that, safety was also brought up as a bigger issue, and we identified or grouped those projects separately as well. And then pedestrian-related improvements, we grouped those in a different category. So pedestrian improvements, sometimes there's some projects that go along with the capacity project, or roadway widening and stuff. In some cases, there are standalone pedestrian projects as well. So this group made pedestrian improvements list may not look as robust, but keep in mind that a lot of those issues have been addressed as part of the capacity projects. And then the next category is bicycle and multi-use path projects. So this is, again, anything that was related to standalone bicycle and multi-use path or trail projects were included in this category. Then last but not least, transit recommendations. As Phyllis mentioned, Aaron from Valley Metro was spearheading this portion of it, and then we worked with him hand in hand, making sure how that impacts the overall transportation system as well. So it was, usually you don't get that opportunity in here. We're blessed to make sure that this was a study that we had the opportunity to work together. So, and then, as I mentioned previously, based on the gaps, needs, issues, we developed a whole host of, a whole universe of potential solutions. And then we also looked at all the previous plans that have been completed to date, and then brought all of those projects in as well. And then we compared those to how best are these projects addressing the goals and objectives set forward in the general plan, as well as the transportation master plan when we initially started this project. Then we also compared that against how well are these projects addressing public feedback that we received as well. Last but not least, we also looked at our, how feasible are these projects? How much does it cost to build these projects? So a lot of information went into really evaluating all of these projects, and we grouped them into 3 tiers. And the reason why we did not rank every single project, but we grouped them into tiers, is to give flexibility for the town and the council to make sure that it's a group of priority projects that the town can focus on. And depending on funding availability, you can address each tier types of projects. So tier 1 represents the highest priority, sort of like more of the immediate needs. And we recommended that they could be implemented in the 1 to 7 year time frame. Then tier 2 or more of the medium priority projects. So these could be grouped under Tier 2, not that they're not important. It's primarily because they may be more expensive. They may not be funding assigned to it. So we group those in Tier 2. And one caveat I would add here is that, just because it's Tier 2 doesn't mean it's not important. If we are able to apply for grants or we find an alternative funding source, so there's, by all means, this is a living document. We should move it from Tier 2 to Tier 1. So we should not restrict ourselves that Tier 2 doesn't necessarily mean it's not an important project. Same thing with Tier 3. Tier 3 primarily includes some things that may be needed out in the future, may not be needed right now. But again, if things change, we should not hesitate to move them up into Tier 2 or 3 as well. So Tier 2, we suggest that, based on what we know today, they could be implemented within an 8 to 15-year time frame, and Tier 3 would be beyond that. Not sure we probably want to go through every project that's we've put together in the master plan, but we'll kind of give you a snapshot of what some of the projects look like. So the first one is the roadway improvement projects, which are basically widening new streets, extensions. An example of this, I would say, would be like the baseline corridor. So this one, the segment from Greenfield to Power Road, has inconsistent lanes, and that usually is a primary reason for congestion. So that could be a capacity project where you're bringing that segment of the street consistent with the rest of the segment. That way, you're removing that hotspot or congested bottleneck. And then on this, you'll also see Heritage District has a special focus. There's some of the new projects in their ash realignment and one ventilator. So this is what I mean by we reviewed all the previous plans and ongoing plans as well, brought those projects and reevaluated those holistically with everything else. So those projects are in. And then similarly, Ocotillo Road improvement projects. And there's a couple projects, I'd say, like corridor studies for Cooper, Gilbert, and Lindsay between Baseline and Railroad. As you all know, those are three of the most heavily utilized corridors from a vehicle standpoint. So, and they're already built out to max capacity at this point. So what we suggested here, instead of just suggesting a capacity widening, we said, let's look at the operations of these three corridors and then see if we can maximize the capacity using maybe signal timing adjustments or maybe using adaptive signal technology, whatever makes sense in terms of leveraging more capacity with the lanes that we got. So that's why we recommended those types of projects. And then last but not least, in this category, we also have some of the roadway reconstruction projects. So these could be that Val Vista Lakes area, which is in desperate need of pavement rehabilitation, and then also the Guadalupe Road reconstruction from Arizona Avenue to McQueen. So those are some examples of what roadway improvements are. And then some intersection improvements. As I mentioned, the public was pretty vocal about wanting to make sure intersections were addressed because a lot of the congestion happens there. So we did identify several intersections that could either use new signals or upgrading of the signal infrastructure, or it could be as simple as retiming of the signals themselves to make them more efficient. So again, there's a lot of signal projects that we've identified that could help going forward. Safety improvements. So this was kind of unique in the sense that, as Phyllis mentioned earlier, one of the key input that we received from the public was, we want to be able to access the trail system, right? So the point that they made, they don't use the trail system right now because they feel unsafe at the crossings, at the streets and the trail crossings. So the town did an initial study, and then we carried forward most of those recommendations, and then also identified some low-stress connections low-stress street crosswalks. So we built on what's already done, and also identified more locations where again, this is an example of how we utilize public input in terms of making sure that people would use the trail system. We don't have to put active transportation infrastructure on every street. We could kind of use what's already there in terms of the trail system if we're able to provide safe crosswalks. So, okay. And then transit, as I mentioned, Aaron's team basically led this effort, and they've looked at a number of options in terms of, all the way from, what happens if you increase the frequency of service, or what happens if you extend the times of when the service starts and ends, or, what happens when you extend the route itself. And then they also looked at potential new circulator routes, express routes, and also high-capacity transit routes as well. So based on all of that analysis, Aaron's group kind of ended up recommending like what the transit vision could be. The important thing about this part is when his team was doing transit, we did engage the neighboring partners, Queen Creek, Chandler, Mesa, as well. And it was a pretty interesting experience to see how all of these agencies also had an influence on how transit the transit routes were developed. Okay. Again, going back to the public input, one of the things that was mentioned was to expand service to new areas. So I believe, expanding the service, again, is very expensive in terms of transit. So the focus was, what can we do in terms of stretching our dollar, basically. So we did, Aaron's team looked at microtransit as an option. So his team identified those shaded areas as potential good candidate areas where microtransit could be implemented. So microtransit is essentially sort of like an on-demand service, like an Uber or a Lyft type of a system where you would call in for service and then you'd get a ride based on where you're located and your service area and all of that. So. And then from an active transportation standpoint, as I mentioned, we scoured through the entire roadway network to identify if there were any sidewalk gaps or bicycle network gaps and stuff. So one good thing about Gilbert's system is that the bicycle and sidewalk network is pretty extensive. The issue was there's gaps in the system. That means that people are not going to use it because there's a gap in the system. So we were able to identify these gaps and then recommend which ones could be priority projects and then which one could be medium priority projects in terms of closing the gaps with respect to sidewalks.
Excuse me, can I just interrupt for a second, please? If we continue with the slides, it's probably going to take us right to 6:30, and we're not going to have time for questions or discussion.
We're almost done.
Okay, just checking. Thank you.
Let's see. Same thing with bicycle facilities. We did evaluate different corridors and then identified, prioritize them into 3 tiers. Last but not least, trails. Again, this one was one of those where we worked with the Parks and Rec Department, created a vision for what a master trail network should look like, and then we did identify gaps and essentially identified 4-tiered projects for trails. Again, this is a slide just essentially shows you what the vision for the trails would look like in terms of the look and feel, and then provides you some additional design guidance in terms of how to develop the trail network. Okay. Last slide, implementation. So we do have an entire section devoted to what can the staff do going forward in terms of implementation. We need to, it talks about how best to make sure that the TMP vision comes to a reality. Okay. So that.
I jumped the gun by a couple of minutes. Thank you. I just saw all those slides on my screen and thought, we're never going to make it through to the end. Yes, council members, questions for our presenters and or Kyle and our team?
Yeah, Mayor, I don't have any questions. In reviewing some of this, I realized what a heavy lift this was. I want to thank Kyle and staff and our vendor that went through all the effort to put this together. I really appreciate how some of it was prepared, where the investments can be prioritized, because obviously they don't all carry the same significance or importance or urgency, and I think it's good that they were identified in that order in several places. So I appreciate that. So thank you for your hard work, and I appreciate the presentation tonight.
I do want to give a lot of credit. They kept up with us, the staff did. So we've seen them in meetings so many times. This was the first time we're actually meeting in person. So.
After all this time. It's amazing, right? And thank you. We have amazing staff. I appreciate the comments. Comments, questions? Both of you, Kathy? Excuse me, Councilmember Tilke?
Thank you, Mayor. This may be more for Kyle, but I'm curious as we look at CIP in the priority of those projects, how does this connect with that? And will there be changes in priorities as we move forward, and just kind of how we connect those?
I'll take a first shot at it, and then I'll let Kyle fill in any gaps. So CIP projects were one of the list of projects we did take into consideration as well. Even the bond projects we did take into consideration as well. And we evaluated all of these CIP and bond projects as well based on the current data that we had. And then we did group them into the tiers that I was talking to you about. So there may be, it would still be a CIP project. In some cases, we actually made recommendations to enhance that CIP project slightly. That way it provides more bang for your buck. So, okay.
And Mayor, Council, it's also important to know that every fall we begin the CIP process and we look at all the projects in that as we prepare to bring it forward to Council this time of year. So it is an ongoing kind of analysis and prioritization of the projects.
Councilmember Anderson, did you have? Oh, that was your question. Thank you. Fluid documents, they can be changed and priorities can change depending on what the situation is, just like with our CIP, and things can be moved around based on priority after things are reassessed each year too. Yes, Councilmember Kaprowski.
Hi. Thanks for the presentation. We've only seen this during the study session and maybe once during a staff meeting, but I'm glad that we're going to have some time to dive into this big document before we can bring it back to our council meeting on June 28th. But I just want to say that from what I've seen so far, I do really appreciate the context-sensitive approach that this is giving to the town in terms of not treating every roadway the same way, and that it's based on land use or what's happening. I think it's very forward-thinking for the town. And I did see some alignment with some of those CIP projects and the bond, so it was kind of evident that that was integrated into this process, and I appreciate all the public engagement that went into this plan, because that's so important to understand what our residents and businesses need and desire as we look forward for the next 20 years in transportation. Thank you.
I do want to give a shout out to the digital engagement team. Without them, we would not have been able to do the outreach that we did. Kelsey and Jennifer's team were just amazing in the way that we did very little. We just provide them technical information. They did all the hard work.
Thank you, and I think Jennifer's right back there in the room. So thank you for that. I'm sure they appreciate those comments. Vice Mayor?
So maybe I'll proffer a contrary opinion, just for the sake of discussion here. I actually think that there's a major disconnect between this document and what I would say is probably a pretty valid survey and very recent survey of the bond that was passed in November by only 164 votes. And I'll pair this with a question. Was who prepared the survey instrument? Was this Valley Metro, or was it maybe in collaboration with Gilbert Digital? Maybe it's a question for Phyllis.
We did the survey instrument in collaboration with Valley Metro. Not the bond one.
Correct. This one with the slide deck that was online. So I went back and read the bond question, and I know you've kind of maybe provided some guidance on how some of these can be prioritized and where funding might come from, and obviously the bond will be a big backbone fiscally for some of these projects. And this is what the bond issue says. A yes vote supported authorizing the city to issue $515 million in bonds to construct, acquire, and improve streets, roadways, traffic signals, drainage systems, retention basins, and other transportation and infrastructure projects. This to me is, we paid a good chunk of change. I think it was like $18,000 for a consultant to do some polling to provide I think what was, the best possible, ballot language to have this pass. And I think there's a huge disconnect in what people, were voting on as far as the ballot language versus what we're seeing in this document. There's a massive reliance on bikes and trails, which I appreciate, but those are recreation projects in my worldview, not transportation projects. I understand the very foundation of this document is spelled out at the very front, moving people, not cars. The reality is we move 95% of the population with cars. And then you throw in the freight in there and the importance to moving goods and the way behaviors have changed from consumers, and that just, moves the priority for investment in those roadways is even higher than that is. So that's part of the reason why I had believed that, separating some of those parks and rec issues maybe into a parks bond was a more transparent way to, address the public. You had an interesting stat that came out, 12% ranked making public transit a more viable travel option. There's ways that, this survey was conducted that I think skew the results, because the questions in themselves are asking, I would walk more if, I would bike more if. So it's just the whole thing kind of guides towards, I think, what was the end agenda, and not necessarily building something that reflects what the community truly wants. I'll just add, I think it's probably not the wisest thing to have 20-year planning envelopes for things that are so fluid and disruptive in the technological space as transportation is. I think you could probably ask people, would you use the gym more if you were offered a free membership, and the results would be sky high, and the reality is sorry, it was my vice mayor duties. I'm going to have to say we don't clap to maintain decorum. But the reality is we can make all kinds of investments and to try, because we believe that people should bike more and walk more as a mode of transportation to get places. We should be accessing jobs through 20-minute bike rides. I don't think that's going to have an iota of an impact on changing behavior, because in reality, you can provide free gym memberships and people aren't going to go to the gym more. People don't want to ride there, I think, recreationally, and providing a good, recreational backbone for trails and bikes and things like that makes sense. But when it comes to, reworking entire road systems, and some of this is going to come down to the individual projects. I want to see, what the diminishment is on, I've heard it's not going to have, certain of these projects not going to have any diminishment on capacity. I want to know things like, well, what about throughput? How are we going to be moving cars? Are we going to be moving fewer cars? Those kinds of questions, and the devil, I guess, is in the details. But I would say, as a guiding document, this is not reflective of what I think the majority of people, by a slim majority of the people, wanted to invest in. And I just think it completely misses the mark. Those are some of my thoughts. I want to have a discussion. So if we only have about 20 minutes, but.
Yeah, we have time. I agree with many of your points, Vice Mayor, actually. I think we live in such a large community with large families, with large roads, that the majority of the travel in Gilbert is going to be by car. It's going to be by vehicle. It's not going to be by bicycle. And even if they offered me a free gym membership, I wouldn't be going, because it's just not my thing. And I answer those questions with no, I wouldn't be biking more, and no, I wouldn't be walking more, because I go everywhere in my car. This town is big, and in order for me to get around every day, I'm definitely in a vehicle. So I definitely agree with a lot of your points. I think we need to separate out the vote on the bond with the actual transportation plan that we're discussing tonight, because they are two separate things. I understand that A lot of the projects will be similar, same, based on the CIP, based on the transportation plan, but this plan itself is more of a guiding document and not a solid in concrete guiding document, but a living, breathing, transitioning document as we move forward, just like our CIP plan that I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. Things change, things get updated, things get reprioritized, and we are always reassessing those things. So I agree with many of the points that you made, and then a couple I'd like to hear other input from council members on. Anyone?
I would just like to add that, those are definitely good points to bring up. But as we look to any other examples in the nation, there is no city that has built their way out of congestion. It's not possible. And the way to tackle looking into the future, I believe, is to look at the holistic view. And we've seen that with the pandemic. When people were telecommuting and not commuting into work, that's when you see a significant change in congestion. And so even though a lot of the plan that was presented includes some of the multimodal options, I think that has to be part of it. But I agree that that doesn't mean that it's going to be prioritized over our vehicle travel, or that I would want that, but that it should be looked at because it's a holistic view of transportation and we can't build our way out of congestion. And so looking at smart solutions and alternative solutions, which include, as I mentioned, even telework, is going to support our overall improvement for our residents, because then people that do have to drive for their work can get there without the congestion, where other people that may have the choice to take other modes can do that as well, and it just helps the overall system. So that's my view in looking at this, and it's a 20-year plan. I agree that it's disconnected from the bond, but there are some similarities there. And I guess I have a question for Kyle in terms of how often is the town required to update this plan?
Mayor, Council, in the implementation strategy that's in the plan, we're supposed to take a look at this every year. I don't know that there's a statutory requirement for an update to a transportation master plan, but the way we've got this set up is we look at those projects and we take a look at this plan at the end of every year. And just to add on to that, the 20-year portion of this, I agree there's a lot of things that change in the 20 years. I mean, look at our general plan. We make changes to it quite frequently. One of the reasons to do a 20-year plan as you look at a transportation master plan is because of those tiers, because there's so many projects you need to, some of these projects will be out there quite a ways. So it gives us kind of an idea of what buckets and what tiers to put these projects in, so that everything's not in the 1 to 5 years. So it's good to have that list of projects that we can kind of project out over time as to when we might complete those.
A lot like our CIP. Yes. Councilmember Tilkey.
Thank you, Mayor. Vice Mayor, I think that I would disconnect the bond question in this, because I think what the consultants did is they took into consideration that if the bond passed, these projects would be in there, and how would this transportation plan impact those projects. What I see this plan doing is looking at the projects that we have on our books today. Are there ways to enhance those projects to accommodate connectivity? And I do believe our community is asking for connectivity. The majority of that will be, using your car. But I believe that there is a high percentage of people who want to be able to ride their bikes and be able to connect in a safe manner. I mean, we're putting money in over at Greenfield to connect those trails because of accidents. And so that's how I see this master plan moving forward, not shifting the priorities to bicycle and pedestrian, but enhancing what we have and making sure that we're taking that into consideration. That's the way I'm looking at it. But saying that, we just got it in our Dropbox last night, so I have not read the entire packet. I got the staff presentation. I glanced at a few things, so I'm not speaking from reading the whole document, but that's my feel for what's happening right now anyway.
Thank you, Mayor. And we did receive just kind of high-level presentation at Parks maybe a month ago, 6 weeks ago. And so I asked the question, I said, is, a part of this to, it seems like one of the goals is to, try to get people to reduce the amount that they're driving, which is why we would, reprioritize this in a mix, and much of this is oriented toward that. And the response was yes. So then I just asked the question, well, then what's the metrics on the back end? If we construct these projects and we reconfigure these complete networks, that we've been successful in that goal. And the response was, well, we can click and see how many people are riding bikes and walking, and then we'll see if we were successful because, more people will be walking and biking. So I raise that as a red flag, because what I don't want to do is adopt a compass or a roadmap. And this signals to policymaking bodies and the public what our priorities are. And, it's great. 45 miles expands bike network, 200% increase in multi-use path, 84% increase in residents, being able to access a grocery store by bicycle ride. This stuff just doesn't seem rooted in reality. It seems rooted in social engineering. And so I think a lot of other cities in other states around the country, they do have in their planning documents, we're going to change and optimize signals to create congestion because we're trying to force people out of their vehicles. So I raise that as a red flag for this body, because if that's the direction they want to go, I want to move in the opposite direction. So,
Councilmember Anderson.
Just a very short comment. I agree. I don't want to force that to happen either, and I don't think that's what our intent is with this plan. But I do know that as we do a citizen survey every year, transportation is the worst, the absolute worst category that we are rated on. And so we need to be able to address that. We don't go by a day without somebody emailing each one of us about the problems in this community in transportation. And that's why we need a master plan. That's why we need the bond. And I feel like others, I need the time to go over this. If we need to separate things out somehow, I'm fine with that, but we need the time to go over it.
Mayor, just finally say, and I'll go through them too. I haven't had a chance to go through all the specific projects, but if we could flag, which ones are going to, you have some, I like that you put in these paragraphs on trade-offs, because that's the conversation the policy body needs to have, is about trade-offs. If we invest in this, what are we giving up? And it might not be when you reduce the lane size that you're at decreasing capacity, but you might be decreasing the speed. So you're not going to be able to move people as quickly if you're restricting speed. And maybe that's on a road-by-road basis, and we can have those debates, restricting turning movements, adding track, all those things. So I just, special highlight on the trade-offs, I think will help clarify the process for everybody up here too.
Councilmember September.
Oh, Mayor, I was just going to ask, it seems like everybody could use some time to review this. Then would we have another opportunity for a study session, or would we go right to agenda on our regular agenda?
I think the goal was to bring it to an agenda for, to approve it in June. But, and I know that's because we've been working on this project for over 2 years now. And so, but it is in reality the first time the council's seeing it as a whole. So if we needed to bring it to us another study session, we could potentially do that.
Sounds like it might be a good idea. That's just my thoughts.
You need more time to review it. I realize it's a lot of information, and that's why a study session is here, so that you don't have to read it all. You're getting a great presentation from all of these folks, and now you can go back and invest more time in it now that you know what the gist of the story is, right? And you've heard all of these great comments, and now you go back and review it all and then come back again to discuss it.
I'll also add, Mayor, I think it's a little thin if this is part of trying to accomplish our goal of being the city of the future. I think it's a little thin on the adapting to technology, you know, the whole section on walking that states it's the oldest form of transportation is great, but obviously if we want to be, you know, adapting to, you know, voucher programs for ride sharing and autonomous vehicles and, you know, more sophisticated traffic optimization signaling, all that kind of stuff, you know, those are things that I think are, you know, I think that's what, if we're wanting to be city of the future, those are the things that I think we should be, you know, planning on building a network around and just being able to be nimble to respond to. So we're not sinking hundreds of millions of dollars into things and then, you know, we're not, you know, we don't have the money to adopt, you know, new technology that's really going to create efficiency and quality of life for residents and businesses.
Councilmember Hendricks, any comments? I'm good, thank you. Okay. Team, I think you heard some great comments here from the council, and we can discuss. You're going on vacation. When you get back, when we can do another study session and discuss some of the issues that have come up, and maybe you guys can go back and work on some of the things that you heard this evening before we come back again.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your presentations. Okay, that was the only item that we have on our study session for this evening. So I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting, and you have about a 10-minute break before we will kick off our regular council meeting.